This is Father Louis Scurti with Friends of the Word. Thank you for joining us on this 23rd Sunday of the year, Ordinary Time. We're here at beautiful Church of Annunciation in Wayne, New Jersey. But we travel around, so you might see us at another church. Why don't you join our mail list? Contact me at lscurti, S-C-U-R-T-I, at hotmail.com. God bless you, and thank you for joining us at Friends of the Word. Holy Gospel according to Mark. Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. The people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment and begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears and, spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Immediately the man's ears were opened and his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to tell, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished and said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. When the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and there were others that were not what we call canonical, put their thoughts on parchment and started writing, they each had a different approach. And you can hear and see today's approach through the eyes and soul of Mark when he goes back and almost paraphrases in modern day terms, in the times of Jesus, what was going on for the people who were just coming out of the exile and may have been still in the exile, people of Israel who were longing to go home. And he uses the example of Jesus, but let's go back really quickly to Isaiah, when the promise of hope is coming. The promise of hope is being placed in their hearts. They just went through generations of an exile in Babylon. They're coming home, and what do they see on their way home? They see a desert, okay? And the people of God, God is very possessive of his people. In the scriptures of the Old Testament, we have people of Israel devoted to God, Yahweh. But they believed, even then, that there were other gods. And the Edomites and the Phoenicians and the Babylonians each had their own gods. But we had Yahweh. Eventually we'll know, through the development of spiritual consciousness, we develop the fact that there's only one God, and not many, many gods, just one God. Whether you call him Yahweh or Allah, or Jehovah, it doesn't matter, one God. So here, the people of Israel are being protected by God, and don't forget the prophet is teaching them, and he's really speaking on behalf of God, and he's teaching them how God will protect them, not like what happened the last time. What he's referring to is one of the groups of the Edomites had conquered the people, and once the people were moved off to Babylon, the Edomites moved into their land, they took over their land, and God is saying, I'm going to get even with you, the Edomites, because don't forget, God's faithful to his people. And he says, now I'm going to give you something. I want you to have hearts that are no longer frightened. I'm with you. Be strong. Fear not. Here is your God. He's coming to save you. The eyes of the blind will be opened. Blind to faith, blind to optimism, blind to the possibility that God is taking your part, God is acting on your behalf. And you might say, well, this is written hundreds of years before Christ came on the scene, but applicable to us nevertheless, who sometimes are closed-minded, heart closed, ears closed, to the presence of God among us and the possibilities of God among us. And then he continues You're going to leap like a stag on this desert as you go through the desert. And the sands are going to be flourishing waters in the desert. They're not going to be sand. It's going to be water. Your enemies, they're going to have pitch. They're going to have tar. You are going to be able to run across and leap like a gazelle, like a lamb, like living animals going toward your new home. Streams will burst forth, and thirsty grounds, springs of water will come forth. Now, you can just see Mark has these stories of Jesus, and the stories of Jesus were oral tradition. They were passed on. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each write in a different period. Traditionally, Mark is the first one, the shortest of the Gospels, and the first one to be constructed maybe around 60, the year 60. But they're all oral traditions are being gathered up. And you could just see Mark's enthusiasm when he said, remember that story about Jesus touching the lips of the mute man and touching his ears? Let me go back into scriptures. Doesn't that sound familiar? Like the ears of the deaf will be cleared and the eyes of the blind will be opened? So he gives us his version of that beautiful miracle that takes place. But he's very astute to what he does, because he not only gives us the miracle, he gives us the direction of Jesus theologically. You read a few seconds ago, Jesus left the district of Tyre, went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, district of Decapolis. You said, yeah. Now Mark. Mark is telling us, listen, this Jesus is for all people. This Jesus was rejected by his own buddies, his own friends, his own neighbors, his own townspeople. But this Jesus is for all people. So when he comes, he doesn't stay in the Holy Land, doesn't stay in Palestine. He's going to the land of the Gentiles. Again, go back. The outsiders, Gentiles, were not acceptable to the Jews. All those other religious groups, not acceptable to the Jews, according to their faith and their covenant with God. Understood? Jesus goes beyond those boundaries. He goes beyond the boundaries, and he goes into the land of the Decapolis. He goes into the land of Assyria, Phoenicia. He goes into the land of the pagan. And you would think, they don't believe in him. They bring their sick to him because his reputation is out there. And what does he do? He does something that almost parallels what their healers were known to do. He groans as he heals this man. He spits. He makes certain gestures, puts his hands in the guy's ear and on his mouth and touches his lips. These were the gestures of the pagan healers as they trying to heal. And you see that today even you go to a doctor. He opens this and opens this. So Jesus is doing what they were used to. But Jesus has a little more, doesn't he? And his groan, he's praying to the Father. He's looking up to heaven, the source of his faith, the source of his life, the source of his power. And then, Ephatha, the same thing you hear at baptisms. Every time we have a baptism, let the ears of the new person be open and his lips proclaim the glory of God. He says, open the ears so he may proclaim. And again, true to Mark's version of this, Mark has what we call the messianic secret. Every time Jesus does a miracle in Mark, Jesus says, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. Because Mark's theology is that Jesus didn't come to do miracles, Jesus came to bring the Word of God. Jesus came to bring the good news. And it's beyond miracles, because it's not time limited. It's not going to be for the duration of the, 30 years, 40 years that Jesus lived on earth. No, his miracles are beyond time. Because his miracle is the fact that the Word became flesh and brought the good news, which is continuous, the ongoing message of Christ to all people, even to today and tomorrow until he returns in glory. So Mark gets Jesus to say, don't tell anybody. But it's interesting. The mute guy, who now has voice, goes and proclaims. The more he told them to say nothing, the more they went out proclaiming it, because they were astonished exceedingly. He has done things well. Now, who's saying that? The people who just saw the miracle. The pagans are saying that. The non-believers are saying that. You see what the ministry of Christ does? Very sneakily, or very planned, he goes under the wires. He goes under the radar to advise us, and this is picked up in James's gospel, to advise us, don't you dare keep the gospel to yourselves. Don't you dare think it's your gospel. It's meant to be proclaimed by all people. All people. And speaking of all people, what does James tell us? Because James's gospel letter that we heard is written basically in the atmosphere of Jesus. He hardly mentions Jesus in the whole letter. Maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end. Why? Because the whole letter is Jesus. The whole letter is the good news. And he says, show no partiality. Now think of the Edomites, and think of the Phoenicians, and think of the people who are the Gentiles, and think of Mark teaching us something about it, and now James picking that up. What is he teaching us? That Jesus came for all people. So he tells us, brothers and sisters, show no partiality. Adhere to the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. And he goes by grade. He goes by social status. If a person comes with gold rings and fine clothes and sits down, you say, sit here. But if someone comes and is poorly dressed and shabby, you say, sit over there at my feet. That's not Christ. That's not Christian. Oh, we don't do that, do we? We don't judge by appearance. Oh, no? I'm Italian, American-born, not Mexican. But in Arizona, I look like a Mexican, I guess. I was in Arizona this summer. Heard of racial profiling? I was racially profiled. I'm in the car near the Mexican border. I was passenger. Security pulls us over. Where are your documents? Hey, you think that's cute, maybe? You may, oh, ha, 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 nice story to tell about. Well, I had documents. But some of our Mexican brothers and sisters don't have the appropriate documents. Show me your papers. And the governor of Arizona just passed that. Yes, you can say, show me your papers. If I look around this church, there's a good handful of you, me included, that could be said to. Show me your papers. Racial profiling versus show no partiality. See how even our country needs Christ? Because Christ's truth is far deeper, and we love the Constitution, than the Constitution. Christ's truth of love and showing no partiality and respecting people of all nations is the root of our faith. It's why we gather. Because he can say to any one of us, no matter what your last name is, you are my son or my daughter, you're my brother or my sister. We're all of the same Father. In Arizona, you can't do that. And some of the other border countries can't do that. And our bishops have addressed that. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who wants to come in illegally, blah, 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 blah. No, there's a process. There's a process that we must respect. This is not a political forum right now. But know your issues. Talking recently about the two candidates. Doesn't matter which group you're in. Even there, if you're a Republican, you cannot be partial to the Democrats. If you're a Democrat, you cannot be partial to the Republicans. In other words, we have to respect each other as Christians and then let it flow into our respect for each other as Americans of diverse opinions, of diverse backgrounds, of diverse politics. James is saying that to us. Centuries ago, he started with the gold rings on the finger, but you know, part of our ministry is a preferential option for the poor. We have to be more concerned for the poor than we are for ourselves. A la Christ. Following Christ. Not me, not the Pope, not the bishop, not the governor, not the mayor, not your pastor, Christ. He's the guide. He's the direction. He's the force. Years ago, before racial profiling was even a word in public parlance, I was in Jersey City at a supermarket, don't remember the name. I had just painted my grandmother's fence. It was a Saturday. I looked gross. I had paint on me. She wanted groceries before I went home, so I went down to the ShopRite, or wherever it was. So I shouldn't say ShopRite. One of the supermarkets. Went down there. I was dirty, believe it or not. I was unshaven. It was Saturday. I don't shave every day, so I was unshaven. Went shopping, got a few things. Not a lot, but just a few things. Little bag. Before I left the door, security guard went in front of me. Okay, inside. Now I was a priest at this point. And I said, what? Inside, we know what you did. You must be kidding me, I said. Now, don't forget, this is downtown Jersey City. I happen to be friends with the manager. Down Jersey City, everybody's friends with everybody. Except this guy didn't recognize me. Not that he should. I wasn't a public figure, but enough. Well, I said, what do you mean? You have something in that bag that doesn't belong to you. I says, are you yelling at me? Are you accusing me of stealing something because I look like this? Because I'm dirty? And now I'm loud. Because guess what? I didn't have a microphone, but I have a mouth. And I was loud. All the cashiers stopped. They looked over toward the door. The manager comes up and said, Lou, what's the problem? I said, would you tell this young man that I will not steal anything from this store? And I ripped open the bag. Here's what I bought. Search me. Well, they weren't going to search me. And they picked up the bags, and I didn't even have to pay for the items, by the way, because he gave them to me comp. If your priest can be racially profiled, you can. If your priest can be picked out because he or she is accused of doing this crime or that crime, you can too. See how prejudice is so deep-rooted? Because I was dirty? Because I was unkempt? Because I had a 5 o'clock shadow? Think Susan Boyle. Remember when she came on the scene years ago? Oh, the judges. I love the word judges because it says it all. Because only Christ is a judge. And the judges are making fun of her and making faces, and she's a frumpy English woman, okay, go ahead, do your thing. And then she stunned the world with her voice. What a lesson. What a lesson in judging by appearances. James, Christ, the scriptures. And we still need those lessons. But the foundation of those lessons are here. The foundation of those lessons are in Jesus Christ. We're not mute. We better proclaim his word in deed and in action. Just like James says, we cannot be just hearers of the word. We have to be doers of the word. We have to proclaim our faith in Jesus outside, in our actions, in the supermarket, in our schools, in our classes, on our playgrounds, in our offices. We need to proclaim by word and deed that we are not prejudiced, that we do not hold anybody as a step lower than ourselves, that everybody is made in the image of God, and that we need to respect. And the old people teach it to the young people teach it to each other, and give it back to the old people. Because we all need to hear it over and over and over again. Jesus gives us the sight to do this. He gives us the power to hear the word and do it. And he sends us out. Just a little story about hearing. This old man goes to his doctor and says, I can't hear. Jesus just healed, gave hearing back to this man. He said, I can't hear. So I'll give you a nice hearing aid. Tests it, tries, go 2 or 3 of them, tests it. Comes back in 3 weeks, big smile on his face. Can you hear everything? He says, yes. He says, what was your family's response to the new hearing aid? He says, I didn't tell them. But I changed my will 3 times.